So thank you, organizers, for inviting Ina. I'd like to give you one warning before I start. This presentation was supposed to be given by Ina's president of the management board. Unfortunately, due to some unexpected obligations, he wasn't able to do it, so I'll try my best to replace him today. So it was a last-minute replacement. Well, the topic of this year's National Oil Companies Conference was obviously on how to maximize on partnerships. And then the topic of this last session is obviously some new deep water opportunities. So in our presentation, actually, we wanted to combine these two. So we will try to present how we see INA's contribution, which is the well-established mid-European Croatian company, how we see our role in terms of partnerships when it comes to new deep water opportunities in Croatia. We do know that there are not so many such opportunities in Europe, and most of you probably know that the Croatian government has just recently opened 29 blocks for exploration in the Adriatic Sea. 5 of these blocks, approximately 5 of these blocks, fall into the deep water sector. INA today operates the northern Adriatic sector, and so far we have discovered something about 15 gas fields in the northern part, and 9 of these fields, gas fields, biogenic gas fields, are today in production, where 2 more are coming into production. And we operate those fields in partnership with our Italian partners, which are Eni and Edison. And these joint ventures are active since the start of production in that area, which is the year 1999. So first discoveries in this area were made already in the early 70s, and since then we have developed something like 19 platforms, and we've drilled 100 exploration wells in the northern part of Croatian Adriatic. Today we are developing 1 more field, and 1 more is still to come into production. But moving further to the south of the Adriatic, which is the central and southern part of Adriatic, we've drilled only about 30 wells, which is much less, obviously, than the northern sector. And we can still say today that this is a kind of frontier area. And today, the focus of many international companies, obviously what we have learned from the press and other sources, is on those areas. Also, in the very southern portion of the Adriatic, we do have a deep sea situation where the water depth goes beyond 500 meters down to 1,300 meters. Interesting enough, INA finished first cycle of the search for oil in the late 80s. But in the year 2011 and 12, we did shoot some new seismic, and it was both 2D and 3D seismic, and we have interpreted that seismic, and obviously today we can propose some really new models, new geological models for that area, and new prospectivity for that area. In the meantime, Norwegian company Spectrum acquired something like 50,000 kilometers of new 2D spec seismic, which is now promoted in the course of the data room opened by the Croatian government. So we definitely do see potential for future exploration in this very southern sector of the Adriatic, which is, as I mentioned earlier, actually the deep sea situation. We may ask ourselves, why now? Why is it now that many companies are interested in this part of the world, which was historically obviously not so interesting? Maybe it is because of discoveries made, giant discoveries made in this part of the world, which is the East Med. And also, if you ask somebody 10 years ago about the potential of the East Med, maybe most of the companies didn't believe, but after a new data set, after drillings and very successful results, obviously the area boomed. So we can think in the same way that the same kind of interest now is raised for Croatia offshore after we have this new data set and we can look at the area with a new pair of glasses. INA tried to attract partners to go into more intensive exploration of the Adriatic some 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but the interest was not so high. Maybe one of the reasons was the perception of the political risk, because we know that the country went through the war not so long time ago, which was actually 15 years ago. But today, with the country being the member of the EU and the NATO, obviously, the situation changed significantly. In terms of geological analogies, most likely not so many geological analogies can be drawn between the Croatia offshore and the East Med. But in terms of analogies, maybe we could be looking somewhere closer, which is the opposite coast, opposite side of the Adriatic Sea, and that is actually the Italian offshore, the southern part of the Italian offshore, where 4 to 5 oil discoveries have been made in the 80s and the 90s. Today, only one of those discoveries is in production, which is the Aquila oil field. So when INA geologists are evaluating this area, they are definitely looking close to this Italian sector and try to find some similarities in the system and try to propose some similar gas and oil plays. It is the same basin, so we do share to the great extent the same geology, but obviously some very specific items should be considered. There are 5 major geological elements in the area, and that is the central Adriatic basin in the middle. And then we do have carbonate platforms on both sides of that basin, which is the Adriatic carbonate platform on the Croatian side and the Apulian carbonate platform on the Italian side. And both of those platforms are bounded by the thrust belts, which is the South Apennines on the Italian and the Dinaric thrust belt on the Croatian side. Today, I would say that we understand much better the whole system, the history of that area, and today we pay a lot of attention to the very ancient roots of the later geological events, and that is the early Triassic rifting system, which is obviously masked by the later geological events and sometimes really hard to recognize on the seismic. So the quality of that seismic is really important to be able to reveal the nature of the whole geological and hydrocarbon system. We do know that the main source rocks in the area also lie within the mid to upper Triassic, where also the major salt deposition took place. And today we look at that basin more in a way like some other world-known salt basins, which was not the case in the past. So this is really one new element which can be brought into this area, and a lot of attention should be paid to these salt events, salt bodies, salt tectonics. And then we do have some major compressional younger events which mask those older tectonic elements, and the situation with the trapping mechanisms and structure formation is definitely to do with the younger Cretaceous Eocene compressional events. At the end, we also take a close look at the possibilities for the gas deposition in the very young clastic sediments, which are Oligocene and Miocene, something that could be similar to the East Med situation, but also Pleistocene possible gas reservoir, which could be of the similar type like we have in the North Adriatic, where we do have production today. Based on these thorough geological and geophysical interpretations, today we are able to propose a variety of leads. So, and we do have a much bigger portfolio of proposed leads and prospects for the area after the new seismic came into the scene. So here we have shortlisted a number of those possibilities, but I would say that there are also more possibilities which are not shown here. Historic drilling in that area showed that the possibilities for the big structures on the carbonate platform, Adriatic carbonate platform, have been exhausted, and most of these structures have been tested in course of the historic drilling. So today, definitely we should be looking for different opportunities in the deeper basinal areas as well. So what we feel are the major Adriatic offshore challenges. Now that we have heard about extremely deep offshore projects and the situation, somebody would say, okay, 500 meters, 1,000 meters is not so deep, but definitely INA as a company does not have that kind of expertise. And as I've explained earlier, in the very southern sector, as you can see on this map, the sea depth goes down to 1,300 meters. And definitely, we do see a potential, some structures are definitely indicated in that area. So for the company of our profile, water depth still represents a kind of challenge. So for that reason, we think with our knowledge, experience in the area, and with our databases available and some world-class deep water operator, we could make a good match. Weather conditions, I wouldn't say it represents such a great risk in the Adriatic, but definitely should be considered. And then in the course of previous drillings, we have observed some extremely low reservoir pressure situations which should be considered when proposing future drillings. Also, the depth of the reservoirs are quite challenging. As we have heard from the previous presentations, some companies hit the records beyond 6,000 meters, but here in this case, in case of our company, drilling beyond 4,500 meters also represents a kind of challenge. And then at the end of the day, considering the depth range of the targets detected and water depth, we can imagine the price of the future wells in terms of $50 to even $100 million per well. And when putting all the elements of the area together, where still we don't have a proven hydrocarbon system, we still evaluate those prospects within the risk range, geological risk range of 10 to 15%, which is still rather high. Impact on the environment plays a very important role here because, as you probably know, Adriatic Sea is a rather closed system, and definitely a lot of attention will be paid on that aspect. And I think only now Croatian public is getting used to the idea, or not getting used to the idea, that the oil companies will come into the area and possible HSE hazards. But on the other hand, INA has excellent HSE records in the North Adriatic, where in the course of more than 15 years production, we didn't have any accidents, and the same goes for the Italian sector. A few words on the existing oil and gas infrastructure in Croatia, which is really well developed. Here on the upper right side, you can see the oil pipelines network, and then in the bottom left side, you can see the gas pipeline network. And the role of INA in terms of infrastructure in Croatia is really important because we do operate 2 refineries, we operate storage capacities, and a local network when it comes to our producing fields, both onshore and the offshore. So we feel that that is definitely advantage on our side. Having said all this in terms of what we know about this area and managing the part of infrastructure in the area and being present in the area for more than 70 years already, with our multi-decade shallow offshore, I would say, experience, with our in-house knowledge and databases, we do also have a well-established cooperation with reputable international oil companies. We feel like we are really a good partner to kick off even the deep offshore exploration in Croatia. Also, as a local company, obviously there are no language barriers, but I would say maybe even more important, we do know how to navigate through sometimes difficult administration and bureaucratic system. So with all these elements presented, we do feel we do have a high potential to speed up activities in some kind of partnership or group of companies. So I will wrap up this presentation with the summary of INA's activities along the oil and gas value chain. So this is the National Oil Companies Congress. We used to be the National Oil Companies until the 2003 when the company was privatized. So today we are quoted on London and Zagreb Stock Exchange, and we have been privatized in 2003 by the Hungarian MOL. Today, Hungarian MOL Group share in the company is 47%, but still the government share in the company is really strong, and it is 44%. Our 2P reserves today are 266 million barrel oil equivalents. Our production is 40,000 barrel oil equivalents per day. Today we operate the Croatia onshore and the offshore, Egypt, Angola, and Syria. Unfortunately, due to this political situation in Syria, our projects are under the force majeure. We also do have a service company, which is also a kind of advantage, and that's a drilling service company, owns both the onshore and the offshore rigs, one semi-sub rig and one jackup. Today they operate in Albania, Hungary, Oman, and Libya. Historically, we have operated in more than 20 countries worldwide. As I mentioned earlier, we operate 2 refineries with the output mentioned here. And we do the wholesale and trading activities as well as the retail, and we are the major retail operator in Croatia with 444 fuel stations. When it comes to gas industry value chain, we do the exploration and production, and the majority of our gas production comes from Croatia, onshore and offshore, and it used to come from Syria. We do the trading through the INA's company Prirodni Plin, and we do the distribution of gas as well through the company called Croplin. So the message of this presentation is that INA's strategic goal is to strengthen and consolidate our position on the domestic market by winning at least part of the exploration blocks offered on the tender for the offshore. And we see this by, in terms of participation by, with some reputable deep offshore operators, preferably. Our competitive advantages are definitely knowledge of the area, very well organized databases, and definitely positive experience in the country, where we have produced 1.2 billion barrel oil equivalents so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lilit Conti.